Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. Since nicotine vaping products first hit the market in the United States back in 2007, the U.S. has been the lead driver of innovation and consumer adoption of these products worldwide. But while the U.S. is still the largest market for vaping products, anti-vaping zealotry and regulatory insolence has all but destroyed the legal U.S. vaping industry. Case in point, FDA's recent ban on Juul. Joining us today for a deep dive into the impact of FDA's Juul ban and to discuss how the war on vaping affects consumers is Alex Clark, CEO of CASAA, the National Consumer Advocacy Organization for Smoke-Free Alternatives. Alex, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me back.
So before we jump into the Juul ban, for our viewers who are unfamiliar with CASAA, and what's the mandate of the organization? What kind of things do you do?
Sure. Well, for some background, CASAA was formed in 2009 under similar circumstances to what we're seeing today. FDA was taking action to remove certain products from the market, and a group of consumers banded together on an internet forum of all places and decided that the consumer voice needed to be represented in this debate. People were afraid of losing access to these products that had helped them quit smoking. And so since then, we have been advocating for and promoting information and access to these life-saving products.
Now, how many members are in CASAA?
At the moment, we have more than 250,000 members.
Now, I mean, is the number of smokers and vapors in the U.S., is it still rather high?
Yeah, by anyone's measure, in the United States, we have 30.8 million people who are still smoking, and certainly every effort is being made to bring that number down. And of course, consistent with our mission, it's mostly about attracting people to the solutions and encouraging them to try new smoke-free alternatives rather than just the quit or die strategy that we've seen from public health people for so many years. And of course, among people who vape, I believe we're talking about between 10 and 15 million people.
That's a lot. So the FDA, let's turn our attention to them because they had a very busy week last week. It was quite monumental. In fact, on Tuesday, FDA announced plans to reduce the maximum level of nicotine in all cigarettes to a level considered non-addictive. On Wednesday, the Wall Street Journal published a leak, presumably from the FDA, stating that the agency would ban Juul products. And then on Thursday, the FDA then went ahead and denied marketing authorization for Juul products and immediately banned the products and informed retailers that they were required to take them off the shelves. And then on Friday, Juul won a temporary stay in appeals court, allowing Juul products to stay on the shelves. But for how long, we don't know. So basically leaked on the Wednesday, banned on the Thursday, and by Friday, Juul, had a temporary stay. So, Alex, what was your first reaction to the leak, and how surprised were you that the FDA pulled the trigger on the ban?
Well, as far as the FDA banning Juul, it wasn't much of a surprise. I think many of us have been preparing for an announcement like that. But when really considering the amount of work that Juul put into the application and how long this took, people have reported this is a $100 million application that took 2 years. It is a bit shocking that FDA would, I think it's safe to say, disregard a lot of very high quality science that went into this application. I can't really say that, the denial was predictable. I think many people were very much hoping that the regulator would act like a regulator and consider all the science and data.
Yeah, I certainly assumed that there would be an approval. Now, you were just mentioning in terms of the PMTA that Juul had filed, what FDA, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but what FDA was saying is that basically Juul's application was conflicting, the data was conflicting, and didn't have enough evidence in terms of the fact that it was appropriate for the protection of public health.
Yeah, this is really kind of at the heart of the matter. As I mentioned, this is a process that took 2 years to get us to this point where FDA is issuing a marketing denial order. And just like what other companies have experienced, if an application is lacking a specific piece of information, as part of the protocol, FDA needs to reach back out to that company and put in a request for more information. And rather than issuing a marketing denial order, I think many people would expect FDA to issue deficiency letters, which again is part of that process of requesting more information. And so the really interesting thing about this is that FDA is citing a lack of information about toxicology. It's shocking and very disappointing because out of any of the applications, maybe with the exception of applications produced by Reynolds, there should be an abundance of information here. And when we're talking about, toxicology, specifically the potential of chemicals leaching from a pod into the liquid, there's really not much difference between Juul and some of the other products that have been authorized for sale. In fact, this is something that's been a known issue for more than a decade. When I started vaping back in 2013, there were talks among people in the community that it was a good idea to stay away from certain flavorings because it would crack your tank, and so these were things that sort of got worked out early on in the beginnings of the industry, and so manufacturers know this. They have data now, and certainly a company like Juul has robust science to determine what are the best products and chemicals to use to make the plastics and the e-liquid so that there's no interaction or concerning levels of leaching going on.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because that reasoning seems to defy kind of Juul's experience and with both the technology and implementation of it. So, Juul says that the decision to ban its products was motivated by political forces that sought to blame the company for the youth vaping crisis. Any truth to that?
Well, I can't get inside the head of the FDA, but it seems like one of the most plausible explanations. There has been so much anger and hype around Juul's role in young people experimenting with vapor products that, again, this is one of those things that makes a marketing denial order less of a surprise. It's clear that the anti-tobacco campaigns, anti-tobacco lawmakers, they wanted to take their pound of flesh from the industry, and Juul was the prime target. So again, I can't speak for people at FDA, but that really does seem like the best explanation.
Now, certainly there's a bit of a love-hate relationship within the industry over Juul because it's had such an impact on open systems just from, the bad press and everything else that's come from Juul and being tied to the teen vaping epidemic. However, though, on the other hand, those products have delivered, the promise of a smoke-free life to millions and millions of consumers.
Yeah, I think I had heard or read someone posting something along the lines of 3 million people who have been able to use Juul and successfully switch away from smoking. And just to clarify, when we talk about the quote unquote youth vaping epidemic, these are numbers that are showing youth experimentation. This alarming spike in use among young people is almost entirely driven by curiosity and maybe even fitting in with the in crowd. These are not young people who are necessarily at risk of continuing to use nicotine for the rest of their lives or go on to smoking. I mean, kids aren't smoking anymore. Fewer than 2% of kids are even messing around with cigarettes right now. So it's important to really put that vaping epidemic claim into perspective here. And so that really calls into question, even focusing on Juul. Certainly they flew a bit too close to the sun, I think, when it came to the demographic that they were targeting for their products. No matter how noble their intentions, it was very dangerous territory. And of course, among the community, They have not done much to win a lot of goodwill among the independent vapor industry. Oftentimes, we have found ourselves on opposite sides of a policy debate in state legislatures. But again, none of that takes away from the effectiveness of the product, and anybody who is supportive of tobacco harm reduction should be disappointed and, frankly, alarmed by the marketing denial order.
Now, why is that?
Because of the flimsy reasoning that FDA gave. As I said, this is a $100 million 2-year application process. FDA did not give the company any warning that they were going to deny their products. They didn't reach out to seek any more information or clarification about these issues. And as we're discussing here, it's toxicology is something that sounds believable. I think the public is willing to accept. And many people, of course, believe that vaping is as harmful or more harmful than smoking. And so once again, this is an example of FDA leveraging the public's misunderstanding of these products and misperceptions of risks associated with these products in order to achieve an end here, which is scaring people away from vapor or any nicotine product.
Now, obviously, there was a certain measure of glee from the anti-vaping folks. And here's the case in point. The leader of the crew is Mr. Bloomberg, and so he put this out the day of the ban. Juul is largely responsible for creating and fueling the youth e-cigarette epidemic. To date, Bloomberg.org has spent $160 million fighting Juul and other flavored e-cigs to protect kids from these addictive products. It's great to see the US FDA taking this important step to protect kids.
Well, my take on that is, first of all, this step does not protect young people. In fact, it's most likely doing more harm to their parents than anything else. And what we've seen from commenters on social media is young people have already moved on. Juul was a passing fad, and young people have gravitated to products that they can get a hold of. And these are things that are being sold by informal sources. They have not gone through PMTA review, and we expect this to continue. Vaping is not some unattainable product that we have to rely on massive corporations to provide. These products, this industry was built by people who wanted to improve upon devices that were coming to America from overseas. And they did so in their kitchens and their garages. They did it for themselves, and then they brought their friends along with them. And that's how the vapor industry organically grew to a point where a company like Juul could sell its products and become very popular.
Now, is that world that you just described of the innovation of the open systems basically market, is that still doable in the US? Or, has that not largely been crushed?
It's more difficult now, obviously. There is a tremendous amount of risk for anyone who is manufacturing products without FDA authorization. But there's, even though we're looking at an industry functioning in a diminished capacity, there's really no reason to expect it to disappear. We certainly would like to see regulations that companies can follow, standards-based regulation that opens it up to many competitors. Diversity of products, I think, would be ideal. But in the absence of that, people are just going to fill the demand the ways that they know how. I would say, a word of clarification here. Usually when we're talking about illicit markets, we're talking about increasing the potential of poisonings or contamination, products manufactured poorly. Certainly people should be concerned about the environment that products are being manufactured in, but the main ingredient here, as far as a device and liquid goes, is the liquid. And how to make the liquid is well known. There are lots of resources online for people to make their own, or if they want to scale up an operation. It's entirely doable, and people can do this in a safe way that does protect anyone buying these products. So it's useful to point out the added risks that the regulator is putting on consumers here, but in reality, there's not much concern as far as the quality of products goes, other than and this is specific to young people, the informal sellers who will now be adding this to their menu are also people who are selling other illicit drugs like cocaine and heroin and methamphetamine, again, suffering from a very similar regulatory debacle where there is no legal regulated marketplace. And for those substances, we know there is a lot of concern about poisonings and contamination that are leading to tens of thousands of people dying every year.
Alex, let me ask you, are any of the popular devices that are out there on FDA's approved list, or is it all really shoddy stuff that's, not really going to be a good substitute?
Well, there are certainly products that FDA has authorized, and I think it is, credit where credit's due. At the end of the news release that FDA put out about the marketing denial order for Juul, they went on to say at the bottom that for anybody who's worried about losing access to Juul, certainly try all of the NRT and other resources that we've all heard about, and many of us have already tried multiple times. But they added that there are now 23 products that FDA has granted marketing orders for, and they fit the appropriate for protection of public health standard, if that's even actually a standard. And so there are products on the market. In fact, the Enjoy Ace, as far as I understand it, is very, very similar to Juul in terms of the formulation of the e-liquid and certainly the nicotine content of that liquid. And the Reynolds Views is also a product that people may consider switching to. So it's not that these other products are less effective or less enjoyable. They are, of course, limited to tobacco flavors, which is not a popular choice for many people switching away from tobacco cigarettes. But there are options out there. There are other smoke-free options available. Anytime I have the opportunity to suggest alternatives for people, I will mention Swedish snus. General or Swedish Match was authorized to sell, I believe it was 8 different types of snus, and those are in flavors other than tobacco. You have mint and wintergreen. Not, of course, the fruit flavors that many people enjoy, but still something other than tobacco. I use snus, and I enjoy it and recommend it to anybody. So there are products that are out there. They don't have the same headline-grabbing appeal that Juul had. But they are out there, and certainly, and I'm not here to promote a particular company, but in terms of using snus, I would like to see people give oral nicotine products another shot. I've found them to be really useful, and certainly they've helped me stay smoke-free for several years now.
Yeah, and this isn't the old school chaw days, is it?
No. Swedish snus is it's a pouch product. And it fits right up here in your upper gum, and there's no spitting involved. It's not hard to manage. It's very discreet. You can literally use it anywhere no one is checking your mouth.
Well, it's good to know. It's good to know that there are options out there, and quite frankly, actually, the fact that the U.S. has approved snus, whereas in almost all of Europe, it's illegal, and you can't find that kind of a product in Canada either. So it's pretty good to know. So let me ask you this. When it comes to then consumers who obviously are the consumers of these products, is it a challenge to get them involved in vape advocacy?
Well, and I've said several times before, one of our biggest recruiters is bad policy, or in this case, a bad decision by the regulator. Last week, we saw a lot of anger, a lot of disbelief, and a lot of, I think, mistrust being fomented here from people who use these products to quit smoking. And it's sort of our job to seize the opportunity and give people an outlet for that anger, and get them engaged in communicating with lawmakers and regulators where it's possible. Right now, we have comment opportunities on the menthol and flavored cigar ban. Those are 2 separate comments, so people can check that out on our website, casaa.org. And we will likely have something up to comment on the very low nicotine content rule. And of course, as we go back into legislative sessions in 2023, there will be plenty of opportunities for people to get involved. But I think, as you're sort of hinting at here, is that people are getting really tired. I've experienced my own level of burnout over the past couple of years. The lung injury hype and hysteria of 2019, I think it did a number on a lot of us. It is very difficult to be operating in a space where we know that people are twisting the truth. We know that government officials who we're supposed to trust are lying to us, and that these lies and this misinformation is demonstrable. It's confusing, it's frustrating, and it's exhausting to see people buy these lies and move forward as if the truth doesn't matter. All that matters is their ideology and this fantasy world they live in, where everyone is free of sin and no one uses drugs, and little Johnny and Jane are growing up in a perfect world with access to everything that they need. It's just not reality, and I empathize with, and I have experienced the same level of fatigue that a lot of people out there have. But there really is no shortage of bad decisions. So even though we don't want to see these horrible decisions and misinformation being propagated, they are opportunities for us to get new people engaged. And the only silver lining here is that maybe with all of the ridiculousness that's going on with Juul, we may see some new blood coming into the fight.
It's troubling, Alex, for sure. I think everything that you just outlined, because I've certainly experienced it too. And I mean, it wears you down. It just really wears you down. I don't know how many times I can keep asking the same questions over and over and over again. Eventually, I just want to find somebody and wring their neck, if that's possible. But I think, though, it's important to also mention, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is that when public health gets away with this kind of lying, and if they're doing it with regard to nicotine and vaping, in what other areas may they also be doing that? That's my concern.
Yeah, I feel a little weird about saying things like that, because it's a little bit in the vein of whataboutism. It's sort of, if this, then that is also possible, but it's unavoidable. I think, you sort of led this question with public health getting away with this. Unfortunately for public health professionals, the longer time frame doesn't actually lead to them getting away with this. As we go further into this issue, more and more data becomes available, more and more science is produced. We have more and more people switching away from smoking. The proof is in the pudding. And at some point, it becomes undeniable. And I think that people in positions of leadership in public health, or even in the anti-smoking campaigns, at some point there's going to have to be some accountability. That may not come in the form of legal consequences, but the loss of the public's trust, I think, can be even more damaging.
Here's a question for you, Alex. I mean, it's one of those. It's one of those deep, philosophical ones. But could it be that the anti-vaping or the anti-nicotine folks, they think that somehow the industry, or we as consumers, even individual vapors, are somehow getting in their way of delivering, better kids, better human being?
I think that's possible, and I think it's even demonstrable. I mean, we've heard the line for so many years now that, smoking was declining and kids weren't smoking anymore, and then vaping came along and undid all of this progress. That's the narrative that they've been pushing probably for more than 10 years now, and it's simply not true. I think the counter to that is that tobacco harm reduction, or harm reduction in any setting, is really a complement to existing regulations, if not a remedy to regulations that aren't working. And so it's unfortunate that they have made this an adversarial relationship. ultimately, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want people to live healthier lives. We want people to have access to products that make them feel better, that improve their health. It's really just a matter of how we're all proposing different ways to get there. But as I said, I think it's really important for people in the anti-tobacco world to start looking at harm reduction as complementary, and we're really not enemies here.
It's interesting because so many people in public health are very pro harm reduction when it comes to hard drugs, alcohol, and that safer sex, and that kind of thing. But yet they just refuse to accept the theory of harm reduction when it comes to nicotine. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think a lot of this is based on the sins of the past. It's a matter of public record at this point that the incumbent cigarette companies actively misled the public about the risks of their product. That is, for many people in public health, for many average citizens, unforgivable, and it has led to millions of people dying early, and for folks who may live a full life, living out their last days in agony due to some sort of smoking attributable disease. And so I think there is this sort of constant, there is a current through all of this that tobacco companies must pay for their past offenses. But we had this discussion in America. We've sorted this out, actually. The tobacco companies were sued. They were hauled in front of Congress. They are now responsible for paying millions, hundreds of millions of dollars every year to states. And of course, the states don't use that in the ways that the CDC recommends, which is a good or bad thing, depending on how you see anti-smoking campaigns or anti-smoking education that happens at the state and local level. Certainly some of that is not actually helping. Most of it is not helping very much. And all of this sort of culminates with the Tobacco Control Act. Now, anybody who wants to bring a tobacco product on the market has to go through FDA, and it is supposed to be a rigorous scientific review. And part of that is creating a bottleneck to make sure that, every Tom, Dick, and Harry just can't put their own cigarette or vape or smokeless tobacco product on the market, and we don't know what's in it. But the other side of that bottleneck is really limiting the number of companies that are participating in the market, making it easier for the regulator, and reducing access to people. Even if it's a safer product, FDA seems to be going out of its way to make it harder to buy a smoke-free alternative than it is to buy a cigarette.
That they are. Let me ask you, the feds are not the only ones pushing against vaping. As you mentioned, the states are massively involved as well. What's the war on vaping looking like on the state level? Wins and losses?
Wins and losses, it's the usual suspects, I would say. At this point, they've become the usual suspects for me. Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, California, even Oregon and Washington have gotten in on this. Minnesota has seen battles at the local level for several years now. And so it's your coastal states, the Midwestern elites. Illinois will be another one. Chicago, I don't know that anybody ever puts Midwestern and elites in the same sentence, but I definitely just did it. If that's a first, I'll take credit for it. It's a similar song. It's a lot of misinformation and lies. I'm standing in New York State right now, where flavors were banned after lobbying from several of these campaigns, claiming that vaping was contributing to rising numbers of COVID-19 among youth. The damage was done. Flavors were banned in this state. And then within a matter of, I think, less than a year, even the Mayo Clinic released a study showing that vaping had nothing to do with increasing COVID-19 rates. And so we've seen this, as far back as 2009, these campaigns have been making all of this stuff up. And it has scared the pants off of lawmakers. New Jersey was the first state to ban vaping indoors, just like smoking. And similarly, this was done on baseless concerns about secondhand vapor, or it's just as harmful as smoking. And of course, in 2009, we didn't have all the science that we have now. But that playbook has been deployed mostly in states where you would think that regulators would jump on board with something like banning vapor.
Now, and as you mentioned, the flavor ban is usually the thing they like to go with because it's obviously so devastating to the industry. Now, there was a couple of wins that in the last 2 or 3 months. I think one of them was in Colorado. What do we know about that?
So Colorado had a flavor ban. It did make its way through. I believe it made its way through the House, and I think it was stopped in the Senate, if I remember correctly. It did not make it to the governor's desk, and I also believe that Governor Paulus was not interested in signing it. This was something that he believes should be handled at the local level. Obviously, we would rather see preemption in this matter, that this is something to be debated at the state level, harmonizing regulations across the state, rather than people dealing with a patchwork of laws similar to what you had in Massachusetts for a while. This is actually a strategy that the campaigns employ, where you sort of create a mess at the local level and then essentially make a reason for the state to step in and codify what they've been doing at the state level. So yeah, we had a victory in Colorado stopping a flavor ban. As far as I understand it, there is a bill on the Hawaii, the governor of Hawaii's desk. And I have heard that they are also not very interested in signing it. I think the last remaining piece of legislation that we're concerned about is in Alaska, which was a tax. And I have not heard any updates about that recently. But again, this is a proposal that's come back session after session and hasn't ended up getting across the finish line. So hopefully that is stopped in its tracks this year too.
Right. And so then back federally, because I want to bring it up only because I'm very interested in the actual local retail shops. But with the synthetic nicotine ban from the FDA, and once that happens, I mean, are there going to be any products left to fill the shelves of all these vape shops? Because many of them actually have already closed too as well, just because of everything over the last couple of years. So are there still a lot of vape shops? What's their health like, and what can they expect in the next couple of months?
Yeah, unfortunately, we've seen hundreds of vape shops closing down across the country. I don't have an exhaustive list of all the shops that were here, before the pandemic or before FDA started enforcing the regulations in 2020, and how many are left. But one of the things that's given, I think, consumers a bit of a reprieve here is that FDA does have enforcement discretion. And although they may not admit it, one thing that is known is that it's the closed system, single-use products that young people are more interested in. That's not to say that they don't get their hands on open system products, but the open system products are more complicated, they're more expensive. Both of those things are barriers to access, especially for young people. And certainly they don't fit discreetly in your shirt pocket. And so it's obviously more visible. But with regard to FDA's enforcement discretion, I think there are likely some retailers out there who know that FDA isn't going to be cracking down so hard. Again, this depends on what state you're in. If your state hasn't taken drastic action against vaping, then there's likely a little bit more leeway for retailers to keep participating. We've seen a lot of vape shops sort of retooling their business model. Now they're turning into glass shops. They're selling cannabis accessories or CBD in order to keep their businesses afloat. And so even in those types of settings, devices are something that would still be available. And I can't speak to purchasing a bottle of e-liquid under the table, if you will. But I have heard from people, at least in my community, that these products are still being sold. You just have to know who to ask. And it's not hard. You can pretty much walk into a store, and as long as you don't give off that cop vibe, they will probably give you what you're interested in.
What's, a tragedy is that for a short period of time there, vaping, you felt good about doing it. You felt good about quitting smoking and vaping. And then, they've almost constructed a situation in which that you feel that you're doing something as bad as smoking when you're vaping. And I think that that emotional connection that used to be there for vaping is now gone. And I think that's a tragedy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And one of the stories I tell about my experience in smoking was in the late '90s. I visited Asheville, North Carolina, and this was one of the first communities to not really ban smoking indoors, but they enacted an ordinance that essentially supported businesses that wanted to prohibit smoking. And so many businesses opted in and they prohibited smoking, knowing that the city would have their back if they had an issue with a customer who was giving them a hard time about not being able to smoke in their establishment. But it really felt like your average person on the street was supportive of this sort of smoking ban. And I remember walking around town smoking and feeling people's eyes on me and getting that sense of guilt and shame that I had really never felt before. And so when I quit smoking by switching to vaping, like millions of other people, I thought I've done the right thing. I did what they've been asking for decades. I quit smoking and I really enjoy this new thing. And very shortly after that, I discovered that this was going to be a huge policy battle. I was in New Jersey at the time, so that's why I always bring up New Jersey being the first state to do the indoor vaping ban. And that all of those feelings started coming back, that now I have to be worried about people looking at me weird because I quit smoking, because I didn't do the way that is prescribed or authorized by FDA. So, yeah, I think it's really hard for people to have to go through that. It's unnecessary, and it doesn't really lead to better outcomes. People should not be shamed for making positive choices in improving their health, just because it's a product or strategy that some people don't agree with. That doesn't make it any less effective, and it certainly doesn't help to be stigmatizing people.
Well, that was a great story. Thank you for sharing that. So just in wrap up here then, Alex, is there anything that you can offer our viewers that's hopeful?
Well, I think the temptation is to say over a long enough timeline, the truth will out. But that's almost sort of at the same time a bit defeatist in saying, hey, we don't really have to do anything. Just, keep a low profile, fly under the radar, and eventually the truth will set everyone free. We really do have to stand up and fight for our rights to use safer alternatives to smoking. And this is a conversation about bodily autonomy, which is front and center in the news right now, especially after the Supreme Court's decision on abortion rights last week. And so I think if there is one thing that's hopeful, is that we are seeing these groups that attract people from all sides of the political spectrum, starting to recognize all of the various ways in which harm reduction is employed. And so this is I think right now, a tremendous opportunity for all of us to be building a much larger coalition, seeking out, identifying, and bringing in our allies here. The conversation about safer smoke-free alternatives is really ultimately indistinguishable from conversations about reproductive health care and harm reduction as far as drug use is concerned. So the audience is growing, the support is growing, and I've seen on social media a lot of people posting about the Juul denial order that I've never heard from before. And people who you go and you look at their profile and it says describing something of a person I wouldn't expect to see involved in this. But many, many people from all kinds of political stripes and issue areas are outraged by this. And so if there is one hope here, it is that our coalition is growing.